Welcome, everybody. Today we have Maxwell and Sebastian, and Maxwell has been working in some pretty dope things for the latest release of Effect CLI, which is an amazing library to, as you might guess, create CLI applications using Effect. And today, both me and Sebastian will be on the look for being hyped about features that Max will present. So without further ado, I'll leave it over to Max for his kind of presentation, screen share, whatever he wants to do.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think one of the primary goals we had when building Effect CLI, or that I had when building Effect CLI, was I wanted to provide a good user story around command line applications written with Effect. I wanted to give people a way to run their applications from the command line because I felt like that was a natural fit for Effect-based applications. Um, and so the main goal of the project was really to give people a good way to integrate the command line with their Effect applications and make it really easy to parse arguments and run whatever programs they wanted to run. Um, and it kind of started off initially as a direct port of ZOCLI, which is a great piece of software that's developed by the ZO folks. But gradually, um, as with our core Effect library, the CLI library has sort of evolved to really take advantage of a lot of the features that TypeScript provides that we get, just natively with JavaScript. Um, and so we've kind of diverged quite a bit now from ZO, and I think it's led to some really exciting features that we've been able to introduce, and also a really nice user experience, especially with the most recent release of Effect CLI. I think we've really improved how one can integrate the actual program they want to run with the parsed command line arguments. So I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. And so right now we're just sort of sitting inside the Effect CLI project. And I can kind of talk a little bit at a high level about how one goes through writing a CLI application with the CLI library. And then maybe if there's interest, we can talk a little bit about how it's implemented internally. Um, but maybe we'll take a look at one of the most simple examples we have right now, which is just kind of like a mini Git CLI, which we actually have a tutorial for in the README as well. So if I crack open the README and render it, at the bottom of the README, we actually have a tutorial that walks through building up this example. And really the goal of the example is to just mock out a few of the actual Git command line commands and some of their arguments and options. Um, so in Effect CLI, the primitives that you use to build up your application are commands, options, and arguments. So commands correspond to actual command line commands or subcommands of a command line command. So for example, like git would be your root command for the git CLI, and then you have subcommands like add and clone and whatever else. Um, and then options correspond to either command line flags or command line options, meaning options that come with some value associated with them. So things like the verbose flag for git add, or some built-in options that are already available with every program, which we can talk about in a minute, such as like the version option or help. Um, and then arguments correspond to positional arguments on the command line. So things like if you are when you run git add, you would add some paths to stage them for the current commit, for example. So using these three primitives, you can build up to a fully blown command line application. Um, and one of the enhancements that we've made with the most recent release of Effect CLI is that previously the logic associated with running a command with some options and arguments was totally separate from the actual declaration of the command. But now we've made it a little bit more user-friendly, where you can define the logic that you want to run with a particular command right alongside the declaration of that command. So maybe we can start really quickly, and feel free to interrupt me if there's questions. But maybe we can start just by looking at this first top-level mini-git command that we're creating. So the goal is to create a command that sort of looks like this, where we have the mini-git command that we can run. We have a version flag that's optional, as indicated by the square brackets, a help flag that's optional that also has a short alias, -h, and then another command line option that's optional, the -c flag, which corresponds to configuration values, which are given in the key value format. And it's pretty easy to do this. So because every command in effect CLI ships with some built-in commands already available, we actually don't have to declare the version or help flag for any of our commands because they come pre-built, and we'll kind of show off what some of those things do when we actually run some of these examples. But if folks are curious what comes built in with every command, there's a listing of the built-in options here. So generating completions, getting the help documentation, getting the version of your CLI application, and running the wizard mode, which we'll also show off later, are all built-in commands that you don't have to declare yourself. So really the only command...
Is there a way I can enable or disable those built-in commands? Or
Not currently, but there was a feature request made recently to have the built-in commands show up in the help documentation by default. Because right now when you run the help documentation for a command, which maybe I can show down here in the terminal, if we run the mini-git example, the help documentation doesn't, like the built-in options that are available don't show up by default. So I've been considering, to accommodate that feature request, adding another option or flag to the CLI config, which I can show a little bit later. The CLI config is basically a way to provide configuration to a CLI program. But I was considering adding an additional option to the CLI configuration that allows for printing built-in options with each command, and also allows for toggling them on and off for particular commands.
What would be
But those are
the
just
use case for toggling it off completely?
If, for example, you had if you wanted to independently version your commands and subcommands, if you didn't want the version that's printed to be the version of your actual CLI application, because when you finally get ready to run your CLI application after you've composed all of your commands together, with declaring your top level commands, your subcommands, when you actually get ready to run this, there's two required arguments when you actually create your CLI app. There's a name which you have to give to your CLI application, and a version. And the version in this case, when you run the -- version flag for your CLI application, the version that's printed is always the version that you provide to your CLI app. But to Mike's point, one of the use cases for this could be like, if you had a different, if you wanted to override the default version. I believe it's already possible. It's not already possible to do that because built-in arguments are parsed first in the parsing algorithm. They're always tried first. So yeah, it would have to be like some configuration or something like that to make something like that possible. But it's something I've been tossing around because I know there's use cases for enabling and disabling those things. Does that answer your question, Mike?
yeah, it does.
Cool. Yeah, so if we wanted to set up a optional parameter that we can pass to our top level minigit command that takes key value options, we can do that just by declaring a key value map type of option. giving it the name that we want, which will correspond to a short flag here, and then piping this option that we've created here to a combinator called options.optional, which basically makes this option, this command line option, an optional value and returns an option of a hash map of strings, because again, we can actually provide multiple key value pairs here. So the use case might be like you're running mini-git and you have a couple of key value pairs. And when you run this, you want to be able to use these. So the actual logic here is literally just taking that key value map, turning it into an array and printing it back out. But the point is you can pass, key value map is a variadic option argument. You can pass multiple values to it. And that's actually reflected in the help documentation as well. So if we rerun help, you can see that the -c option that we've declared here, we automatically get a bunch of help text here which describes what it does. And some of this can be overridden by the user, meaning you can provide additional help documentation if you want to. But this indicates that it's a user-defined piece of text. It's a property which can be specified a single time with multiple key value pairs, or you can specify the flag multiple times if that's your
I assume it's
preference.
also possible to have arbitrary variadic options simply as a list of whatever.
It isn't. It is indeed. So if you wanted to have, for example, another option here, which we can use the beloved foo, and we wanted to make it variadic in the way that it's utilized, it's very easy to do that. We can just, create our foo option, options dot. It's going to be, we can say maybe some text. Let's put some text here. And we can give this a name of foo, and we can just pipe this to options dot. There's a couple of combinators that allow you to make an option variadic. There's at least, meaning you have to specify an option at least one time or at least two times or whatever. There's at most. So you can only specify this option at most two times or whatever. There's between, for specifying options between some min and max number of times. Or if you don't really care about the number of times, you can just do repeated, which in this case is what we would do. And then again, if it depending on the variadic combinator you use, the option may or may not be required. But to explicitly say that this is optional, we could do options.optional. But with repeated, depending again on the combinator that you use, the option may or may not be a required option. It might be like something that you need or you don't need. So anyways, there's a lot of
And
combinators. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
at
Mike.
that point, you specify the foo together with the configs in line 7, and you get access to that in your handler
Yep.
after.
Oh, let me actually show that off. So maybe this is a good time to go over the generic command.make constructor and how it's used. So command.make takes 3 arguments. It takes the name of the command that you want to run, which in this case is minigit. It takes what we've sort of decided. This is a new concept in Effect CLI, so we've called it the config. Probably not the greatest name. We can, always make better names. But the type that's inserted in here, if you actually look at the definition of command, of this make command, make, the config is what we've decided to call it. Could probably be a better name, but and you basically have the ability to pass options and arguments in here freely. So let's do foo. And what this will end up doing is in the third argument, which is the actual command handler, the thing that allows you to handle the options and arguments that were parsed, you then gain access to the parsed version of that option in here. So now we have a foo in here, which is now the parsed version, which is a read-only string. And as you can see, like the type of foo is an options of read-only string. So basically we get like the parsed version in the actual handler. And the nice thing about config is that you can have multiple levels of nesting in the config object. So if I had like, if I wanted to make like my special foo, this in theory should work. So now my special foo would get parsed as the object as well. So we've kind of made the ability to allow users to structure the parsed options and arguments whatever way they want in the handler, which is kind of nice. And you can also pass arrays in as sub-arguments here. So we could have an array of foo.
I feel the style of Tim here.
This is definitely the style of Tim. I have to give a ton of credit to Tim for the implementation of the parsing of config and whatnot, because he did a ton of work getting this done. So shout out to Tim for doing this. This was a huge win in terms of usability.
I'm also excited about those changes for subcommands, DX around subcommands,
Yeah,
especially. Yeah.
one of the coolest things is when we decided to implement this localized handler logic. One of the things that we were thinking about is, well, at the moment, previously what you would do is you would take your final command and you would create an actual CLI app out of that, which we can actually demo because it's still possible, I think. CLI app.
Yeah, I've done that in the past, and it always felt a bit like a lot of ceremony around the same.
And it was indeed. So my test app, it definitely was. If we give it the same like sort of parameters, and then you would also pass your command in here. And the problem with this was that when you actually went to run your CLI app, so you would do like a CLI app.run my app, you pass in some arguments, and then you would get a single execute function, which wasn't great because it was good and not good. The good thing was you would get the fully parsed structure of your commands and subcommands, but it required like an additional layer of mapping where you had to go from the parsed CLI domain to some intermediate domain, which would then allow you to handle the logic that you wanted to run. And that it always felt a little clunky to me. We couldn't think of a good way to do it before. We always knew we wanted to localize the logic. But the problem was when we first started talking about localized command handlers, we did not want to take away users' ability to have access to parent options and arguments in their subcommands, because like I said before, previously you'd get the fully parsed structure of your command line and you could pass it wherever you wanted in that execute command. The execute command just is a function that takes the parsed args and options and return an effect. So you could parse the fully pass the fully parsed structure into your subcommand handlers, into your parent command handler. You had access to all the options and arguments you wanted from the parent in the subcommand if you wanted it to do it that way. So we were a little bit worried about localized handlers because you lose that when you do this, right? So if we look at, for example, one of the subcommand, or we thought we would lose that. I'll leave a little bit of a cliffhanger. If we look at the declaration of one of our mini-git subcommands here, where we wanted to create an add subcommand, give it two things here, a verbose argument, which has a short flag and a long version, short option, long option, and then an optional variadic argument of path specs, so just paths that you can pass to get add. So to create this particular option, so yeah, we would take the options.boolean constructor, pipe that to options.withalias to basically give this option the ability to either take the -v short flag or -- verbose. And then we have another new feature, which I don't want to like touch on too many new features at the same time, but we recently introduced a combinator literally like 3 days ago, I think Tim
I need
did
this so
this.
often.
But we basically allowed for falling back to parsing using effects config if you wanted to. So you can fall back to like environment variables or really anything from your config provider that's running in your effect application. So this was a awesome enhancement. But I don't want to get too much into the different features. The point being here is that we have a Boolean argument that we're constructing. And note that Booleans are always optional. You can either, they're there or they're not. So they're always in a true false state. Booleans can take some additional arguments in here. So there's an if present argument, meaning like if it's present on the command line, set this to return false. It defaults to true. You can still pass true if you want to be explicit. But if that flag is present, what's the value is the point here. And then there's also a negation names. So you can basically provide an array of like negation names for this command. So for example, like no verbose or something like that, which would give the inverse of that Boolean option.
That's good to know, actually, because I always wondered, and maybe this is some feedback here, if present wasn't immediately obvious to me what that meant. Maybe if provided, or I don't know, but it wasn't clear to me that meant user provided this value on the command line.
Yeah, naming is
really
hard. But that's good feedback. I've never been happy with the option name either, but that's what we have for the moment. This library is definitely under heavy development. We have a lot of features we want to add. But getting back to the problem that we were talking about before, we have this miniget add command that is a subcommand of miniget, and maybe we want to access some parent options or arguments in this subcommand, right? Maybe we want to get those configuration values from the parent and access them in this subcommand. We thought initially that there was going to be no way to do this, but then once again, Tim had a very, very good idea.
It's always the case that we think it's impossible, and then Tim ends up providing the solution
I
in
have
a
to give
sneaky way.
absolutely. I have to give a lot of credit to Tim for why localized handlers exist. So if you are out there and watching and like the fact that localized handlers are a thing now, definitely let Tim know that you are very happy about that. So anyways, if we want to access the parent command here, so I'm going to quickly highlight the type here. So the type of this command is the name of the command, which is important for, we'll see in a second. Then we actually have all the parameters for the first two parameters that get passed to an effect. So we have maybe it'll be easier if I take you to the command module. So the type of a command, if we just consider this first line here, we've got the name, we've got the environment that is going to be utilized by our handler, we have the errors that could be returned by our handler, and then A is actually the parsed command line arguments. It's not the value that's returned from our handler. Our handlers always return void because there's no reason to return a value from a handler in CLI. But A is actually corresponding to the parsed command line arguments. Again, probably better names we could use here, but the RE and A parameters here correspond to things that are happening within our handler. So if we wanted to make use of the configs in our subcommand, it's actually reasonably easy to do that. We just convert this to, for example, an effect. And then we can...
Gotta probably yield the return.
Yeah, my Vim was just freaking out for a second. Get rid of this breakpoint. So now, same exact behavior as we had before, except we now have an effect.gen happening here. But like, if we wanted to get access to the parent command, we've actually made commands subtypes of effectable, meaning that they're subtypes of effect, meaning that they're yieldable. And when you yield a parent command in a subcommand, you get access to all the parsed options and arguments from this parent command in your
That's
subcommand.
really
Meaning,
smart, pun intended.
I hope Tim watches just so he hears that particular pun. So mini get, and now if we want to just like, take a look at the parsed type here, you can see we basically get the fully parsed parent command options and arguments, that config object. We get that in our child command now and can use it however we want. And the even cooler part about this, so configs now you can see is our option of hash map. We can use it, and we actually do use it in the clone command here to just demo how you could potentially use it if you wanted to. But what's really cool about this is we've also made this type safe, in that when you yield a parent command and a subcommand, the parent command gets added to the environment of the subcommand. And when you provide the parent to that subcommand with the with subcommands combinator, it erases that type. The parent will erase the type from the child command, and you end up with never in the environment. So if you don't do that, you'll end up with a type error, because the command.run should expect never for the environment. So we've made it type safe to be able to do this, which again was something I really never thought we would be able to get to. I was very excited about localized handlers. I didn't really think we'd get this far, but through some Tim Smart magic, we made it happen. Yeah, so that's probably one of like the coolest features about the localized handlers that we've been able to figure out, is we took this problem that we thought was going to basically negate the value of localized handlers and made it into a feature, and we made it type safe. So
and this is something that you don't, you don't just struggle with the previous versions of CLI, but you also, like, this is a problem that you always had problems with in Yarx, Commander, and all of the other CLI tools out there. This is impressive.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there is a lot of value in when you have a program that has parent commands that can take arguments and subcommands that can take arguments, in being able to pass those arguments to the parent command, run the subcommand, and still have the ability to utilize them. It just makes sense to me, when you have a CLI program for your subcommand, to be able to utilize the values that you're passing to the parent. So yeah, we're very excited about this. It's
Funnily
pretty
enough,
cool.
this is only possible because of effect having a context. And
Right.
I guess from what we spoke before, this kind of a tag which is generated, we even saw it in the type of the command before. So when you create a command, there is a tag which is generated, and that's exactly what leads to the possibility of providing to the child or reading from the parent. That's very nice.
Yes, all the pieces falling into place. It's great. One open question that this leaves for me. So now you have all of these different inherited options and args from different layers of your nested commands utility. What if I wanted to do some validation on top of the instructions that I'm passing along the options and args when I'm like for the parsing? So if I wanted to, for instance, do some schema magic to have more control over which args are accepted and what isn't accepted.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's relatively, we don't have a good user story around it yet. We're thinking, or I was kind of considering adding a, I would consider this like a drop-down options constructor, where you can give maybe it would be called like options dot schema or make or whatever from schema. I don't know. But basically, the point would be you would give the option a name and a schema, and it would just parse using that schema. Because then you could do some really complex stuff like providing JSON on the command line and making it available, inside your program. There's a lot of use cases for that. Especially if you're writing like JQ heavy CLI stuff in Bash and you want to pipe it to like an effect CLI application or something like that, or if you're curling some API response and you're getting JSON back and you want to validate it. So it's something I've been considering as a feature to add, because I don't actually think it would be that difficult. Because if we look, I'll drop into the internals for a moment.
To some extent, it's already possible in the sense that you could declare the schemas or the arguments as string, and in the command handler as
but then
as the first thing.
What I was wondering, how would
parse,
then the subcommand also get the passed version of that? After passing through schema.
Yeah, you would need to reparse it or
Yeah.
have a separated tag that you propagate manually, which is not the best, and obviously can be automated, and it would be awesome to have it automated.
So maybe this is a good time to talk about the internals a little bit also, just so people can understand what's going on, maybe under the hood a tiny bit.
Maybe we show first the usage?
Sure. Let's take a look. I don't know why my terminal doesn't
seeing
want to
the wizard
there we go.
in action.
We have another example in here called Naval Fate. Naval Fate is a CLI, a make-believe CLI application that was sort of popularized by the doc-opt command line specification. So I thought it would be a fun challenge to build it with Effect CLI. It's not exactly the specification that Naval Fate specifies. So maybe I can show that a little bit. If we open up Chrome, doc-opt. So it's not the exact spec here because, in my opinion, having two Boolean flags that invert one another is somewhat unintuitive, but you could theoretically make this work in Effect CLI by adding drifting as a negation name to your Boolean. I did not do that with my implementation, but the point is, if we go back, we built this little Naval Fate, or I built this little Naval Fate example to show how you might make a slightly more complex version that has like persistence to a local storage area, and just to kind of show off like something a little bit more complicated. So it might be more fun to run the wizard on a slightly more complex CLI app. So the first thing we might want to do is just run the help documentation.
I was about to say, let's start from the help.
So when you run help, it gives you the help for the command that you run help for. Now, and recognize that what I just said might be slightly like recursive, but
as if the help command is.
True. So when we run help for our parent command, it gives us the help for all of its options, arguments, and subcommands. So whenever you run help for a command, it'll give you the enumeration of help for itself, and then also for any subcommands that it defines. So we don't have any top-level custom commands right now. It's just the built-in help and version command. So if we run version, we also get access to the version. But the cool thing about help is if you can run it for subcommands as well. So for example, if we run help for the ship command, we get the specific usage for the ship command. So in this case, ship does have an option that it defines, which I don't have in my little spec up here. But we have a verbose option, which is why it shows up in the help docs. And then it also shows the help for the subcommands of ship. And then similarly, if we go one level deeper, it's a way to be able to help users understand the levels of your CLI application in a textual format. But it's still not great because you have to run help multiple times. You have to like kind of step through the CLI app yourself. And so I thought it would be cool if we built a wizard mode that basically did this for a user for your CLI app automatically. Basically walks the user
And
through
by the way,
selecting.
it's really very impressive that all of that is generated out of just descriptions and stuff. Like this is already nuts to me.
And you can see here actually that we're adding custom descriptions to our arguments, which you get in the help documentation as well. So it is kind of cool. Like, you get the ability to add pieces of information. You can add descriptions to your commands as well, and kind of see those things in the terminal.
Sorry, can I
But
also take
again,
control of the examples when I'm building a CLI? The command examples with all of the different options there. Can I also control what is printed there, or is this all generated always?
So the control you have over the generated help documentation is somewhat limited. You can't take control of the examples here because this is not really an example. It's the usage of the command. So if you when you run the help, for example, like if we look here at the new command, subcommand of ship, when we run the help documentation for when we run the help documentation for new or move or whatever, we end up getting like and I think I actually just found a small bug. We're getting the incorrect help documentation for, this is a good piece of information to have. And I actually think I know why this is happening, which I was going to hint at the end of our recording, but we just removed an entire like primitive from the command descriptions. But the point is, like, these command descriptions are the actual usage of your subcommand. So taking control of them might be helpful in certain circumstances, but at the moment we don't expose
I
it.
meant more like
One of the
for example values. For instance, in this case, speed here, that you basically say speed 10 or instead of integer, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, help documentation is one area of the CLI that I haven't spent a ton of time recently, and I want to improve the user story around help docs because I feel like there's a huge opportunity there to make like creating this text output much easier.
No one
and
does
nicer.
it manually. Like this is why this is so great. Like no one writes these detailed descriptions and examples for commands and help texts by themselves, and having that generated just from, look up there, it's like 10 lines of code for declaring the args and the options, and then you get all of this output for free. It's nuts.
Yeah, and it's definitely like a lot of fun for building a CLI. You don't have to worry about the annoying parts, which is, for most of developers, the annoying part is documentation. So at least the documentation is created for you. But again, the help documentation is super cool. It's useful. I have to fix this bug. It's not released, so don't worry. But the cooler part, I think, the better user story, in my opinion, is not forcing a user to walk through your CLI yourself or themselves, but to automatically walk the user through the CLI application. We have a full AST internally, which we can show off in a little while, that we basically traverse to be able to generate the help documentation, to be able to generate the completions, which we can also show off. And we also use it to generate wizard mode. So if we run, every CLI app has this, by the way. Every effect CLI app has this built in. So if you build your CLI with effect, you get this for free. And all you have to do is run wizard. And when you run this, it will basically start an interactive wizard mode for your user that walks them through how to use your CLI application. So the first thing we're greeted with here is that we're running wizard mode for our Naval Fate application. Wizard mode is going to assist us with constructing a command for Naval Fate. So please answer all the prompts provided. First thing I'll show is that when you quit wizard mode, one of the fun bugs that we had for a little while was that you'd get a full like stack trace when you quit wizard mode because I wasn't handling like the quitting properly. But now you just get a nice message that, hey, you're quitting. That's it. You're not going to get anything else. And if we restart wizard mode, we can actually go through every one of these commands and options and figure out the command that we want to run. And the other thing that's kind of cool about wizard mode is the command itself is incrementally updated as you walk through the wizard. So the top level command has 2 subcommands that we can run. It's got no options and arguments, so we're not generating any help or wizard prompts for options and arguments. But oops, if
By
we
the way,
want,
just like before I felt team style, now I feel max style. This is definitely your baby.
this is my baby. I've had a lot of fun with wizard mode, fun and hair pulling out moments. Like, why isn't this working? So, anyways, if we have the ability to flip back and forth between our subcommands. One improvement that I could potentially make here is adding the description alongside each one of these like select commands, because prompts are also built directly into Effect CLI. You can add prompt-based commands to your CLI like very, very easily. There's a whole examples module for looking at that as well. And this wizard mode is built on the prompt module. So let's just step through some of this. So maybe we want to create, let's say that our goal is to create a new ship. Okay, so we selected our ship command, and you can see that the command that we're building up here has now updated to include our ship command. And now we're running the options wizard for ship. We have a little toggle here. And it's telling us that we're going to basically select a value for the verbose option that we've provided here. Do we want it to be true? Do we want it to be false? I don't want to run in verbose mode. I want to run not verbose mode. So it continues to update our command here. And wizard mode is like very explicit. So Boolean options can accept the actual Boolean value. They can accept kind of a couple of different true and false values. And it's documented in the Boolean combinator. But when wizard mode is generating the command line output, it itself is very verbose, meaning that it will use the long form Boolean option always instead of just using the command line flag.
Which, to be honest, I prefer because it's the most descriptive. I mean, I don't imagine this is still a learning tool. I don't imagine you wanna use your CLI through a wizard mode usually, but especially when you're figuring out new commands and so on and so forth. I'd love to use the wizard mode, then copy the command and put it on a script file. That's
Exactly.
and in the script file, if you have the very long and descripting things, it's very helpful when you read it to understand it instead of having implicit context.
I agree, and that was one of the thoughts I had. The other reason why it exists this way is because it would be almost prohibitively difficult to when we're generating a wizard for a Boolean option to while we're running the wizard to be able to know the negation name, not the negation names, the value for if present or not as we're traversing. So it's also easier to do it this way. But the other reason it's done this way is to be intentionally verbose, because we want to make sure users have a good understanding of like what they're actually running, to your point, Mike. So we want to create a new ship. So we'll select new, and now we're running an args wizard for the new argument. So you can see we're running it for the name arg. It's a user-defined piece of text, the name of the ship we want to create. So maybe we want to create the, I don't know, Maersk 2, because I don't know if I've already created one. Let's find out. And then once you're done with all of the prompts that wizard mode is going to run for you, it will give you the option of running the command using the CLI itself. So you can either take this command line set of arguments and run it, although one of the improvements I'd like to make, which also is sort of impossible because we don't actually get this information inside the CLI, but getting the actual executable that the user's running to run their CLI would be nice. So for example, I'm running this with like pnpm tsx file name, right? It would be nice if I could figure out a way to get that in here instead of just using the name of the parent command. But we actually...
Isn't it process.argv0?
So process.argv0 in this case would be pnpm. But the full executable is pnpm tsx file name. And because of the way that Effect CLI is designed, it's designed to be agnostic to, first of all, the platform it's running on. You provide the platform that it's running on as a service from the Effect platform repository. And it's also designed to be agnostic of the arguments. You provided the arguments. So the arguments that Effect CLI has to work with already have the executable trimmed off, usually. And in all the examples, you'll see we're running in Node, but we trim off the first two arguments because for our examples, we're assuming you're running pnpm tsx, blah, blah, blah. So it trims off the first few arguments in order to make it work. So we've intentionally designed it this way. We've intentionally designed it to allow you to pass in the arguments explicitly. We believe it's better this way. But this is one area that I'd like to find a better...
Still, I mean, you could define the name of the CLI by using the process.argv, and then it would be... It's kind of up to the user.
Yeah, we could.
This uses the name. So
right.
Whatever name I provide, it's going to use it. If I'm
Right.
using this node, the name could be generated from argv or whatever.
Yeah, it would be. It's definitely something that we want to explore more in the future because the way that you run a CLI can vary. Like if you compile a binary using bun, or if you are running node file name, or if you're running it with pnpm, or so for now we've decided to make providing the arguments to the program as being explicit. And we feel like it's a good compromise, or I feel like it's a good compromise, because when you run wizard mode, even though the arguments that you get out at the end of wizard mode may not reflect the executable that you're running, you have the option to just run the command directly at that point. So now if we want to run this command, we can indicate whether or not we want to run it, yes or no. Let's run the command.
But would it be possible to provide to the run command, instead of only the arguments, also the binary name?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely possible. It is definitely a thing that is possible. Absolutely.
I mean, it's still agnostic from the environment and everything else. You give the whole thing, the rendering and everything else is completely detached. So sounds like a good compromise.
Yeah, and it's something I've wanted to do because there are a lot of places inside CLI where having the name of the executable would be nice. But anyways, if we actually decide we want to run the command that we've generated from the wizard, if we click yes, it'll run the command back through the CLI app, and we'll have created our ship. And because of the way that the little example is designed here, we have this little mock store that the ships are created in. So if we, for example, rm-rf, the Naval Fate store, and we run our pnpm tsx Naval Fate ship new, basically the exact same command that we ran through our wizard. The little example that we have persists to like a little key value store as like an example of how to use it. So, and it uses, like the example uses schema, it uses a bunch of different tools. Excuse me, to make things a little bit more understandable, more comprehensive. We've gotten some feedback that some of the examples that we provide are not in depth enough, so I wanted to make sure that this naval fate example was a little bit more involved to show people how you could potentially do some complicated things with the CLI. The last really cool feature, which I will show, is let's get fish on our machine, for example. We could do it with ZSA, with Zish, we could do it with Bash, but I just want to show the fish users specifically because this feature was something that Johannes had requested from me for, I think, 2 years.
And by the way, the other day he was asking me about, Mike, do we already have something for a prompt in effect? Okay, go to Max. That was my answer.
We do indeed, and you can actually see in the prompt examples while I'm downloading fish, you can see the examples of using the prompt module. Heavily inspired by prompt.js. Great library, heavily inspired, especially the styling, heavily inspired by that. We can actually show off some of this, but basically you can create a prompt using the prompt module, and then you can compose your prompts together. So prompts have the ability to be like mapped, flat mapped. If you flat map a prompt, it runs them in sequence. It's kind of cool. But basically, once you have your final prompt that you want to run, you just pass it to command.prompt, and then you can run it as a normal like subcommand of your CLI.
I assume that's also how the wizard is implemented, right? Using a lot of these prompts. Yeah.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
Regarding wizard mode, is there any future where I can take some control over how the wizard is generated for my command line application? So, for instance, because I like to wrap all of my programs in CLIs, even if they are for server runtimes, just to make them a little bit more configurable. And sometimes there I have, like, let's say 50 different options. If that's a good design decision, I don't know, but I do. And so what are my options there for maybe excluding some of those from Wizard? Is that something that's planned?
Probably not in the short term. I think like the goal would be to give as much control as we can over what you're running in the CLI as possible to the user. It's probably not a short-term goal. I have other features I want to tackle first. For example, improving the help documentation and kind of simplifying some of the internals to make it a little bit more maintainable. Adding some additional features that have been requested. For example, the with fallback from config combinators that allow you to fall back from the effect config provider. The handling of secret values on the CLI, which is, I think, something you requested, Sebastian. So that's actually currently in the works. I've got a work in progress PR cooking for that. So there are just like some other like higher priority features that I have that I want to accomplish. Oh, and another one was brought up on the Discord recently, where people want to be able to take more control over command line option and argument processing. Meaning at the moment, we actually have a very specific set of specifications over how the command line options and args are parsed. So by default, options and args of a command are only recognized before their subcommands, meaning that in this example, -v is an argument for the program command. In this example, -v is an argument for the subcommand. We also have the thing that people I think want to take more control over is option and argument processing. So processing of like option flags or options themselves versus positional args. Because at the moment, the way the parser is defined, and it's definitely doable. It just requires some time. The way the parser is defined right now, options are always parsed before positional arguments. Definitely a limitation that I want to remove from CLI, and potentially give people more control over how options and args are processed for command. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work yet, but it's definitely something that I want to do as a feature. I want to highlight prompts really quick before we look at completions, and then I can answer any other questions you guys have. So in this prompt example, I've sort of just done like a kitchen sink of some of the different prompts that are available, just to kind of show off, how you could potentially use the prompts. So the first prompt, we're using prompt.all here, which again just runs through the prompts in sequence. You can flat map the prompts to get access to the value from the previous prompt to use in your next prompt. So it's very interesting and like fun to design these prompt-based CLIs. And again, you can run it just like the prompt itself with prompt.run. Prompt is also an effect, so you don't even need to run prompt.run. You could just flat map it as an effect. But a lot of times people want a specific subcommand in their CLI application to be a prompt. So you could, make a subcommand in your CLI a command.prompt. And then when people run that particular subcommand, they get these prompts. So this is just, again, a kitchen sink. You can have select-based prompts where you provide descriptions. You can disable options. So these are some options that have descriptions. We can't actually select the blue option because it's disabled, but we can select red. We have confirm-based prompts, so yes or no, and you can flip in here. There's a lot of like config parameters. I forget what they are, and I forget how to show on my Mac. What the initial value is, what the label is going to be. Is there a placeholder? Like, what does it look like? So you have some like config options here. So we'll just say yes. This is the coolest one. I'm just gonna like take some credit for this. Again, super heavily inspired by Prompt.js. Great work on that library. But you can basically design a date mask for your date prompt and slowly iterate through it. So like if we're back on the command line here, we can use the K and J or up and down to go through the different years that we have here.
I have an immediate use case for this because it's so painful in one of my programs to input dates. I need a start date for when to start scraping data from an endpoint. I need this there right now.
So you also get, for some of these prompts, you get the ability to validate. So let's just say like right now we're looking to see if like we have a future date. So let's just pick some future date, and you get error messages on the CLI as well if you provide like something that's invalid.
Wait, and then it lets you fix it?
So
that's great.
Yeah, you can just keep changing the value, and for the there.
I mean, that's such a little thing, right? But having to restart the program.
Such a little thing.
It's such a little thing that it lets you retry here and fix the value instead of just flat out breaking the CLI and letting you start over, right?
We have, again, validation for like, you can provide your own custom validation. There's some validation that's built in, I think, for some of these prompts. So we can go negative if we want to. And again, it works with K and J. You can also type numbers in. Won't let you type letters. And if we don't provide something, it's not happy. There's text prompts that can be changed in terms of how they're rendered. So text prompts at the moment are by default, it's literally just text. So you saw it a lot in the wizard where, for example, when I was entering the ship's name, that was a text-based prompt. You're just entering text. But you can also change it to be either a password or a hidden type of prompt. So, and this is actually one of the use cases for a secret, like parsing things to secrets. So if we set it to a password-based prompt, maybe in that case, like we should by default parse it to a secret if it's hidden or if it's a password. So password prompts will render as a password, and hidden prompts are the type of prompts that you get, like for example, when you do a read -s in bash, where it's going to read the value but it's not going to print it as you type it, right? So if I did a hidden prompt, I'd be typing here but you wouldn't see anything. We've got toggle prompts. You can change how they're rendered. And then when you're done, I just print out like all of these, but you basically get the structure, the same type that you've defined in your prompt is the structure that you get when it comes out. And again, this is the basis for wizard mode, so that's why it looks a little bit like wizard mode. Wizard mode does a little bit more like advanced stuff to make it work, but it's based on the prompt module. And there are, again, plans to add additional prompts like multi-select prompts and other types of prompts that exist. I've seen prompts out there that are like, I forget who showed me. There's a prompt library out there that generates prompts in like a rating format where you can like, you can like select like 1 star, 5 star, and it's like a rating. And I thought that was cool. So maybe I'll implement
Can
that.
one create a custom prompt?
You can indeed. It's very complicated at the moment. I'll show you the code for one. So all of these prompts are built on the prompt.custom combinator. And this, I have no, the only disclaimer I will give about the prompt internals is that they are very likely to change because I'm not happy with them. So the custom combinator is likely to change in the future. But if we look at, for example, like the text prompt, so all the prompts are built on the prompt.custom combinator, which takes in some initial state for your prompt, a render function, which gets the previous, the next state, the prompt action to run, and then a process function. Because really, the prompt runner, the thing that runs the prompt, is basically like a game loop. It's renders frame by frame. So every single time you type something into the CLI, it erases the whole screen and re-renders it. So it's literally like a frame by frame renderer. But I'm really not happy with the design of this. It's unnecessarily complex. It works, but it's not fun to write a prompt that's custom at the moment. And
Well, I mean, I
so
guess you're gonna have to do it only a few times, hopefully.
yeah, I think like the internals are where I want to focus. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. But what you get externally is pretty nice, and the default prompts that exist, I think, cover a lot of different use cases. But the thing is, like when you drop down to the custom level, you take full control over rendering and full control over processing. So you get the current state and the input when you're processing, and you get previous, next state, and the prompt action when you're rendering. And prompt action is just a way for the renderer currently to know when it should exit and when it should, like, for example, trigger a beep. I have it disabled on my computer, but like, a lot of people, when they enter something in their terminal, they'll hear like a beep if it's incorrect. So you can do that with the prompt-based actions as well. So anyways, last feature I will show off is we should now have fish installed. Great. So the last feature I'll show off is the automatic generation of completions. So we can generate completions for the bash shell. We can generate completions for Zish, ZSH, whatever you call it. I call it ZSH. I use ZSH. And then you can also generate completions for fish. So if you want to generate completions, we can maybe use the naval fate example again. Examples, naval fate. And again, every command has those built-in arguments, right? One of them is completions. And it takes one of 4 different arguments. So if I run it like this, you'll just get the help documentation, which again, I think is one reason why folks have been asking for the built-in command options to show up here. Because if you run a CLI with a built-in option and it's wrong, it'll show you the help documentation, but it won't show you the built-in option.
How to fix it.
Right. So it's definitely a good suggestion for the individual that made that request. But anyways, if we run it, for example, with bash, we'll get a big generated bash script that you can then source to get all the bash completions. Same thing with Zish.
I'm curious if you can expose the default commands as normal commands that the user can just import in their CLI.
It's possible. Actually, they can already. I lied. It's possible already.
If
There's
it's
a
like that, then they would show in documentation. They would flow the normal.
The only problem is that if you use them as options in your CLI, it sort of like duplicates everything. So like they'll show up in your help, but then they'll also show up in like the wizard, for example, where you probably don't want them. So I think a good compromise here is probably to add that config to the CLI where by default it shows the help for everything, and then you can shut it off with a CLI configuration, which if you wanted to customize the CLI config, for those who are curious, there's not a whole lot of customization at the moment. You can configure a few different things, but you would basically provide your custom CLI config as a layer to your CLI, and it would overwrite the default configuration with whatever you provide. And there's combinators in here to construct a CLI config just with like partial parameters. It'll merge it with the default, etc. So yeah. So if we want to run generate completions for fish for Naval Fate, we'll get all these fish completions generated for us, but we can then pipe it to completions.fish, right? And then we can start a fish shell, and we can maybe source completions.fish. And now, even though the Naval Fate binary doesn't exist on our Naval Fate, we'll get generated completions for fish. So you'll get like the stuff you can go through: ship, move, new, shoot. And then similarly, if we were to use a subcommand that takes options, what's one? Move. Hang on, I can't remember. Ship, move, and you'll see all the generate. Again, my shell is not configured to render fish output pretty like some people is, where they have like a nice little thing that they can walk through and whatever, and it's nice. Mine does it like this, but you can basically go through, and in this, you actually, in the completion script, you actually do get the built-ins rendered for you. But you can go ahead and like do this, and of course I'm getting an error because this binary doesn't exist, but so yeah, we have the ability to generate completions for bash, ZSH, and fish. If you notice anything weird about completions, please let me know.
I think in combination with what Mike earlier mentioned about passing in the binary name, here this is a weird thing where, like, what if the binary name actually on your machine is called differently than Naval Fate?
Exactly. This is a perfect example of a place where I really wanted the binary name, like the executable, and I didn't have it. So this is a really good example of a place that I really wanted it. I think in most cases, if you're sourcing completions for an application, you probably have it available on your system as like an executable, like a binary that's just going to be the program name. But I don't want to make that assumption. I think it would be better to, again, to Mike's point, maybe source the executable as an additional argument.
By the way, an idea about the proposal of exposing the default as plain and normal commands. I get that you want a bit of flexibility, but like if you run the wizard mode, why can't you simply exclude the wizard flag from, like, you're only gonna access the wizard. Like, for example, when you do the wizard currently and you are one step uh, showing a subcommand, you don't show everything from the previous one. So if
Right.
you enter the wizard is already start. That should not even appear.
I'm not closed off to the idea. I think like I welcome any ideas because I think there's huge opportunity for improvement with the CLI, even with the way it is currently. Like there's huge opportunities to improve it. I think the internals are also like approachable to somebody who's like intermediate with effect. So like uh, contributions and PRs are welcomed. um, but like I welcome all suggestions because I really think that the effect CLI could be something like really, really excellent to use, could be a great user story for developing applications with effect. It already is, I think, like getting there, but I have a lot of like improvements that I want to make to improve the user experience using effect CLI. So yeah, I think there's definitely room for improvement, and I'm welcome to all suggestions.
What's the best way for a potential
Yeah.
future contributor? Hi, YouTube, to come and get in touch with you.
Definitely going on the Effect Discord, which will hopefully be included in the comments below by Mike. So definitely join us on Discord. There's a thriving community of folks who love Effect, love to use Effect, like to use Effect to build really cool things. And especially if you're curious about CLI or want to get involved with CLI development or learn some more about the internals of how some of these things are built, definitely join us.
And you'll
on the
also be in
Discord.
Vienna for the Effect Days, right? Good.
I will.
You're gonna speak about CLI?
I will be there. Potentially,
Okay.
we'll see.
No spoilers
We'll see.
yet, huh?
No
Well, I
spoilers.
mean, the talk has already been announced, so.
But yeah, so there's a lot going on in this library. I think we're probably, I don't know if we're out of time to talk about the internals, but there's definitely, it's like I said, I think the internals are very approachable. So I think folks who don't have a lot of experience with Effect could potentially use this as like a place to start contributing if they wanted to. So
Maybe if maybe you want to spend like 5 minutes just giving us a high level overview of the internals.
sure.
Like if I were a beginner and trying to dig into the code base, where would I start, and which are the components that moves together? And
Sure.
but very
Let's go.
short, I think we already showed an enough material for folks to be extremely excited. And I know usually folks after an hour trending to an hour and a half, the attention span decreases.
That's
So
cool. I'll give a brief overview. I won't walk through like any of like the combinators or anything like that. I'll just talk about like the overarching design because it might look a little weird to folks who aren't familiar with it. But the idea is that again we have command options args. Options and args are built on top of this internal primitive class or not class data type. And each one of these primitives knows about its value and how to parse that value. And then this is kind of built upon by like the options and arguments modules. All of these modules are built internally as an abstract syntax tree or a DSL, an embedded DSL, however you want to call it, of instructions that are used to build up to the argument or option or whatever. So for example, primitives can be any one of the primitive is not really a DSL. It's literally just a bunch of different data types. But once you get out of the primitive module and start looking at the higher level options and arguments modules, we have an AST that we actually build up to describe options and arguments. So while externally you just have like the options type, internally we drop down to a tiny bit of type unsafety, and we utilize this instruction type to represent the AST that we're building up. And you'll see this pattern repeated in the arguments module where we have a bunch of instructions that we want to use inside the command descriptor module, which is the basis for the command module, where we have a bunch of different types of instructions. And most of the combinators in each one of these modules, all they're doing is switching through the different instructions and trying to execute some logic. So, for example, wizard mode, if we take a look, is really just creating a loop that goes through each of these different internal instructions and gets out of these instructions the information that it needs to render the wizard and then obtain information from the user. There it and I would say 90% of the combinators implemented inside args, options, and command are all just basically switching through instructions, which is why I think like this library is somewhat accessible to affect beginners slash maybe a tiny bit of intermediate level knowledge, because when you look at it, there's really not the complexity level of the logic of the combinators is low. What actually like is going on inside handling each one of those instructions might be somewhat complicated, but I think like understanding the overall purpose of the combinators, there's a low barrier to entry there.
And also I would say the patterns that you are using here are very common within the other effect projects. We use exactly the same type of patterns in the core libraries. And if I can spend just a few words to describe why we go through this amount of pain and through the small price of type and safety, as you said before, it's because really we want to have two set of types: one for the external API, what's consumable, and one for the internal API. And we don't want to, if you imagine a stable release of CLI, or if you imagine a stable release of effect, we don't want to have all the internals be part of the external facing interfaces. Otherwise, those would be fixed in stone and never changed. So what this allows us is actually to have a lot of power to change things while keeping the API very stable. That's something we learned over time, and it's repeated over all the libraries. And this is indeed a good starting point, because if you check this, then you'll find the same pieces in effect IO. If you go on the stream data types, and all of those are all built around the same ideas.
Cool. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about some of the work I've done on this library. Huge shout out to Tim Smart for the help that he provided in getting localized handlers and access to parent commands and fallback configuration all over the finish line. So huge shout out to him. Definitely give him some kudos on Discord. And if you're not already a member of the Discord community, please join us. We have a great group of developers who really enjoy helping one another and really enjoy like sharing their enthusiasm about effect, especially Sebastian, as you can see by his background. So yeah, definitely join us on Discord, and thanks again for the
Thank you so
opportunity.
much, Max. This is an incredible early Christmas present.
I can only double down on what Sebastian said. It's been extremely fun to watch this, and I can say that any CLI I've ever built, I wanted to have those features. I wanted to have that flexibility, and I never found that in any language. So that just the fact that now I can get out and build those CLIs, I'm thinking about 100 CLIs to be built. I'm gonna transition myself into a Sebastian for a while.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.